Now, this book is interesting because it presents a very fresh and unique perspective on things like debt, inflation, unemployment, and other various factors that play an important role in how the central government or the central bank responds to various challenges and how they manage monetary policy. And one of the core concepts in this book is the idea of modern monetary theory, or MMT, which I was never really familiar with. I think I've vaguely heard about it in the past, but I had never really seen it clearly presented as an idea and then defined as it was in this book. Now, I will say, this is a very important kind of forewarning. If you are a strong fiscal conservative, or if you have never heard of modern monetary theory before, or aren't familiar with any of the challenges or counterpoints to more traditional or conservative fiscal policy, then if you read the first 2 or 3 chapters of this book, you may be very tempted to just dismiss the ideas outright. There were a number of times as I was reading through those early chapters where I was just thinking, man, if I was a strict fiscal conservative, I would be rejecting this so fast, not necessarily because the ideas aren't sound, but because the way the ideas are presented seem to be out of touch with the perspectives of someone who is more of a fiscal conservative. Now, fortunately, I was vaguely familiar with some of the underlying concepts covered in this book. I've read other books that just touched just barely enough on some of these things that it didn't seem so completely far-fetched and disconnected from reality. So the good news is I did finish the book. I got past what I, again, would describe as being some very difficult to read chapters. If, for example, you're completely unfamiliar with some of these ideas, you might just be very tempted to say, the author's completely out to lunch here. But fortunately, I made it past that stage, and I just want to give you that warning so that if that happens to be your view as you read this book, that you would consider pushing through that. Because what I found when I got to the other end is just a very interesting and fresh perspective on some of these things, again, like inflation and growing debts and dealing with unemployment and how all of these factors kind of relate to each other. And at the end of the day, I'm clearly no expert on this subject. I don't really know yet how I feel about many of the ideas presented in the book. I definitely don't feel qualified to know whether or not all of the theory presented is sound or if there are any issues. I had some questions that I never really felt were directly addressed in the book, but weren't necessarily, make or break issues. But what I will say about this book, and the main reason I really enjoy reading books like this, is it challenges the conventional view and it takes some underlying assumptions, or at least things that I've assumed in the past about how monetary policy works, and it really presents a very different picture, a completely different way of thinking about things. And again, in the early part of the book, it might feel like, well, this isn't that different or doesn't really seem to make much sense. But as you make it through the rest of the book, it becomes a pretty compelling case. And the author is clearly very qualified. She knows what she's talking about, and she makes a strong case for some bold ideas that I just never really heard before.